The following is a conversation between four groups that make up the Glens Healthy Places Project.
My name is Karen Aben and I've been involved in the participatory budgeting strand of the Glens Healthy Places.
The Healthy Places Project's aim is to improve health and wellbeing and reduce health inequalities in the Glens District Electoral Area.
Hi everybody, my name's Ruth McNeil and I'm also involved in facility in the participatory budgeting strand of Glens Healthy Places.
My name is Sandy Wilson. I work for the Northern Area Community Network and I'm involved with the Glens project, which is part of Healthy Places.
Hello, I'm Claire Mackay and I work with the Northern Area Community Network and I'm involved in the community listeners and in the Glens Men aspect of Glens Healthy Places.
Hello, my name's Ada McGerlain. I am with Northern Area Community Network and I'm involved with the Glens Men in the Healthy Places.
Hi there, I'm Kerry McLaughlin. I'm working with Fresh Minds Education and we have responsibility for the Fresh Little Minds project, so working with the schools.
On this, the first episode of the Glens Healthy Places podcast, sit down, grab a cup of tea and give it a listen or a watch.
This is the first time that we've all met as folk working on these different strands, and it's kind of really exciting and interesting because I kind of think we've been seeing them as four different strands I have in my head, and I was really looking forward to this morning to see if there's a shared story that makes sense for all of us as opposed to this strand, what's the story that weaves these four things that makes sense to us? So I think that's something really exciting.
I think as well, it's learning from the first session. It's good to have the community listeners in a separate area to PB or participatory budgeting because it's the same people that are quite often the leaders within that community. And then if they're involved in both, it can be a bit confusing for them. And it's taken up a good part of their time. So if they can commit to community listeners or if they can commit to participatory budgeting, and some of them are also part of the Glens Men group as well. So that's why this time round I think it's good that we're both going for different areas.
And I think Ruth and I were chatting in Lochiel, for example, we can really build on some of the Glens Men that have been involved, and then with the fresh minds, I think as the project develops, we can start to join the dots better in each area, and for people in those communities to start to see this. I mean, that's for me the important thing. People start to see those connections.
That's the one. I think that took a while to get off the ground, that the local community could see it as all part of Healthy Places. Initially, they were looking at it as different things entirely, didn't know they were connected at all, even though we all kept saying Healthy Places. Because the community listeners, there's no money involved, there's no chance of funding a project for anything, and the same with the Glens Men. But the participatory budgeting came along, and that was a whole different strand that they hadn't been approached with before. So it brought out the competitiveness within each of the local communities, I think, but in a good way.
Well, I think that the whole thing has taken off like a holistic approach. Everybody's in it together as such. The men might not think it, because I think the people on the ground, that the community that we're reaching are all perhaps at the stage still where they're in what they used to talk about as in silos, but in their own little pockets. And I think the important thing here is that what we're starting to establish is a crossover, that everybody's actually come together in many ways through these different mechanisms. And I know with the Glens Men had been going way long before all this other stuff had occurred. And the fact of the Glens Men, we have seen at grassroots level where the Glens Men are coming along because all they want is to connect, and all they want is to get out there and meet each other. And they're shy, and we have got some people who come along in this project who wouldn't even dream of going out very often. So it is actually very rewarding for us as
Very much.
project managers and staff and as people, as human beings. It is actually very, very healthy for us all. You know, it works well for us all.
I'm just going to, and then I'll shut up because I've spoken too much, but it was just to respond to a really important point you made, kind of, Claire, that I think the assumption is that PB is about competition. It's not. It's about decision making. And it's how we kind of frame it. And it's so, because we're so used to a competitive society, we compete around grants, we compete around everything, we're always competing. And PB is shifting that culture of how do we make wise decisions about taxpayers' money, which is an opportunity that none of us have really ever had. We're consulted on budgets, but we're never part of making wise decisions together as a community about the spend of taxpayers' money. So I think that's a really interesting, one of, I suppose, these shifts for PB for me, that how do we shift that language around competition to decision making? And that's a massive leap in that sense. But just picking up Ita, I think the connections between all of us in the strands is around just people feeling that they are visible. Whether it's the Fresh Minds or the Glens men or the listeners or the PB, it's how do people really, people feel that they're being seen, which is so important.
And being heard.
And being heard, seen and heard. Yeah.
And I think one of the things in our communities is that people shy away from getting involved with applications because of not only the difficulty but the amount of information that's available. Many people in our communities do not belong to constituted groups, but the beauty of PB is that you don't need a constitution. You only need a small application giving basic information that everybody has in their head, which is 2 pages, and they can take things forward either as themselves or with their neighbours or with a family. And it gives a good feel factor that they actually have participated and done something in their community. And the most important thing about it, it maybe gives them and does give them a renewed confidence to then maybe connect with a group in the village and can increase the voluntary effort in the village. And that's a vitally important issue nowadays.
Can I kick off with saying, I think this is really something that we're very proud of in our Glens Men project. And it was instigated by a man who was 90 at the time, who was 90 years old, and Michael McKeever. And I think it's really important to bring that about, to everybody's attention. And in front of you, you've got little copies of the book, As Lazy as Shock Water, it's called. So it's fascinating reading if you're into other lingos or languages or whatever, Ulster Scots. This is the book for you, and I'll get a little plug in. It's on the NACN's website at the moment, so you can read it there. But Michael McKeever had just come up with this at a big breakfast, I think it was. We were sitting, and just in conversation, he said, wouldn't it be great if we could just put all this interesting conversation and words that we're using and phrases into a booklet? Why don't we do that? So we did. A couple of years later, COVID did step in and give us a stop, for a while. But we picked up where we left off, and we finally got something tangible on in a booklet. So it's a fascinating read. So I think that's one of the big pluses, and the men loved it. The interesting thing is that now they're starting to go back and look at other ways of looking at different languages, maybe ghost stories. And there was one of the events we had recently where they talked about ghost stories. Could we not do something around ghost stories and different sort of stories from local areas? There's always ideas coming from them. So kudos to Michael McKeever for getting the ball rolling with this. And he's still going strong, thank goodness. I was talking to him yesterday. Very enthusiastic. Looking forward to the next event that we've got coming up.
But I think that's key to the Glens Men. You really, really, really need to know your clientele, and you need to allow time to build up the relationships with them, because as you mentioned, Edith, they all want to come out, and it's all about connecting, and it's getting back to the take 5. It's all about their mental health and well-being, and the connections and the connecting is a big part of the Glens Men. And that you and Sandy, I came on later, but you and Sandy had done a lot of work with the Glens men prior to Healthy Places. It had just taken off, but this then reinforced it. And you have to allow time at all the meetings with the groups to chat to the men and to them, you know, for them to come and talk to you. And part of it that we found was just different disclosures we were getting about all sorts of things, maybe things they shouldn't have been telling us sometimes, but that they maybe weren't talking to anybody else for weeks, and it was us that they were talking to, and just that they felt, but that's nice that they feel comfortable enough and confident enough now to do that. And we were even looking at some of the photographs of, do you remember the day we went to Kiltra? And the photographs out in the car park before everybody went in for a meal. And there's one of the young fellows from Armoy, and when he came to the Glens men at the start, he was very quiet. He would look to his father. He has some additional needs, but he would look to his father to speak for him a lot. Whereas that day in the car park, he was the one standing with his hands up in the air. He was part of the group. You know, you could really see how his confidence had grown within the group. And it's just wee things like that you pick up on and realise how vital it is to some of them and how it has made a difference. But it's very, very hard to capture that. That's a big, I would say that would be one of the main problems
You
for
can't
us.
capture that in evaluation.
No, you can't. So you really have to be watching and making your own notes about things and just sort of making time to check in with them. Just in the Glens men bit. Would you agree with that, or do you think that's...
Yes, I think the Glensman's been a real eye-opener for me, having been involved as a volunteer even in community work for many years. I've been privileged to have friends and connections throughout the place where I live. But going to these other villages and so on, I've learned that there's a disconnection, particularly with men. And one of the first things that we did to build up the relationships in the village, obviously, was to lean on the credibility of existing leaders. And through that there, we were able to connect men and bring them to the local cafe and have a breakfast. Whenever I think of our involvement through the Northern Area Community Network, over the years there are what we call nowadays diversionary activities for young people who are disconnected with society and so on. But I learned that there are men younger than me and older than me who are disconnected from society. And even through something as simple as a breakfast, which may be unhealthy, but mentally,
We did have a fruit option.
making the social connections, that was absolutely critical. But the most important thing that I learned from that community person in that village, having had these breakfasts and the men really enjoying themselves at them, was the fact that he told me that some of those men would not have had the confidence to go in to the local cafe to have their breakfast. And that was a real eye-opener for me.
I was just listening to you, Claire, talking about the connections and about how those connections with the Glens men are really key in those social connections and how you can't evaluate that. And I think there's an element of that throughout the whole four strands of the project, especially with PB as well. PB and each of the four elements are linked to connections. So the PB is very much about the community connection and connecting together. Glens men is more on a personal level and building that personal confidence in a one-to-one and an individual level. Then you have the connections with the Fresh Little Minds, with children, and that's connections between teachers and children picking up any markers and helping build those resilient kids. And then you have the community listeners, which again is building connections and allowing those people who naturally be community listeners to have the confidence and knowledge of where to go with next steps and things. But I think there's a real emphasis on the evaluation of processes, and it's not just like for PB. A lot of people say the PB is just an event and you go to this voting event and that's it. But it's much more than that, because there are those community connections happening on the sidelines that a lot of people aren't aware of. People are picking up on groups that they didn't actually really get involved in before, but they actually see some real value in it, and then they start to buy into that and encourage maybe a family member to attend. And then equally, you see, whenever with PB, then you have some people who aren't successful, so they maybe don't get over the mark to receive the money. And generally, in terms of like just straightforward applications, that's accepted. You didn't get the money, that's it. But there's sort of more of a community responsibility to help make those projects happen. And you can see from the first strand that we have done throughout the Glens and Armoy, those unsuccessful projects, how people are coming together to actually support that group or that individual in terms of making their project happen, because they do see the value in it. So I think that there is all around the connections and the connections that people are making within their community for the benefit of the whole community. And things like that there is really difficult to evaluate the benefits of those people coming together and actually picking up and think, oh, I really would like to see that project happen, and let's support them to happen. And it's happened in Armoy before, and it happened in Glenarth recently, where projects weren't successful and they decided to do like a fundraiser themselves, and they were really overwhelmed with the support from the community, and that there's like a ripple effect from the PB, from them chatting to the community about the project and what they want to see happen. So I think there is a real emphasis on that connection around the 4 strands.
I would say that as well about the Cushendun one, the Cushendun PB, because I think on the day it hit everybody really, how it has brought the community together again. And the Young People Project in that one, I can't remember what it was called at the minute, but they wanted a seat and they wanted to be around Glenmona House, I think it was. Yeah. But the fact that they engaged in PB and people got to know them again as a group, and now when there's the Cushendun Forum are now inviting the young people to join their forum, because they now see them as a group within the community, and the fact that they engaged in the programme. But they see you wouldn't capture that on an evaluation sheet. It's just that I was talking to somebody after the project. So it's how we follow up on that. Later on down
and
the
I think
line,
case studies is the obvious,
Yes.
and that young person one in Cushendun, there's such an interesting process happening at the moment in terms of the conversations with the National Trust, and the National Trust having to sit as equals around the table with young people, and the young people getting that sense of, no, we have the right to be here, and to be kind of trying to work out together how we can make this happen. So, that whole shifting of relationships and sense of kind of power, all that's really, really interesting. So I think case studies are going to be a really important part of kind of capturing some of this stuff.
Well, I would agree with you there, Karen, because it's very difficult. Now, this is the part that people don't see. The project part is the work that goes into just simply getting people to show up. It's not just a matter, here you go, there's an email. For the Glens men, we have about 4 different ways we have to communicate. Not everybody's got a mobile, not everybody's got a landline. Very few have got an email, and they don't do social media. So, we're sitting and we're painstakingly, one by one, we ring. We have to sit and ring. We have 108 on our database. Not all 108 come out, but maybe 50% of that will come out at different times. And we have a consistent, great, Ballintoy really love their events. They are the best attenders in the sense if you were looking at it in that way. But from the point of view of evaluation, we don't dare say, right, we're going to have something health and wellbeing event, or let's have a health fair, or they're not going to show up. We start talking all that lingo, to them. We have to do it in such a way that attracts them. So it's like something like, for instance, our next event is on the 19th of October, and it's the Northern Ireland Digital Archives. So that's the heading. But in that, we have dropped in little hints of the mental health thing, a bit of healthy eating, a bit of this, So, we have to devise our plans. It's not our projects, it's not our events. They have come up with what they want, but we have to plan around that to make sure that we're ticking all those boxes, that we're doing all the aims that we have to do and the objectives of that. And they turn up now. We've got something like I think 35 at the moment, counting the 10 that I have to put on. And we hope to have maybe a lot more. So have you seen the digital archives? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I haven't saw them.
Absolutely fantastic. It's a volunteer from Age Concern, and is it Action Cancer? He's a volunteer anyway with one of the charities, and he has got the custody of these digital, it's BBC archives, and so he has them on a special laptop, and he comes out. He doesn't charge a fee. All he wants is his something to eat. And he brings his wife along with him, and he will have his expenses, his travel expenses to and from. And we had him before, and it was the most fascinating. So we're talking about nostalgic trips back into the old black and white and the little fast movies, maybe the little silent movies. They're not movies; they're actual footage of maybe men harvesting, building houses, putting thatch roofs on. Then day trip to Portrush. It's really worthwhile thinking about bringing it to your own areas.
Contact details.
I
That would be really
can send you
interesting.
those, because it was a huge success. We did it for a group of men's sheds, quite a few there, about just before COVID, around the 2018, 2019, wasn't it, Sandy, if you can remember?
Yeah.
And it was snowing furiously that day, but people turned up for it. And it was a great, so that we're looking forward to. And then we're going to do like a health fair. That's our title. But we have to think of something else.
Fair, it won't be called a health
We
fair.
have to find something else that's going to be really connecting for them, so that they don't think. So we're going to have all sorts there, like somebody to come and do their blood pressure and maybe test them for diabetes and things like that. But other interesting stuff, going to happen with that. And I'm aware that maybe you've got something. We can talk on. You've got to start talking.
It's like totally in awe of everything that is going on.
We'll keep quiet now. Get on with it.
I'd really prefer if you would talk. I think it's just so lovely listening about connections and nostalgia, and even the kind of the reconnection of the young people into their communities, and the reconnection between some of the community leaders and the young people. And I suppose last week we had our training, the teachers event. So I suppose Fresh Little Minds has been building for months. I started in May, and then I was thrust into one of the meetings, and I was like, hello, I'm a strange person. It's been kind of on the up since May, and we finally kind of had our crescendo there last week, where we brought all the teachers together, about 12 of the teachers together, and just, this sounds really silly, but we reconnected them with their own childhood,
Yeah.
It was
Inner
child healing going on in the Adair Arms in Ballymena. But it was really, really lovely. It was connecting them back to themselves and connecting them back, giving them space to be reminded of what it's like to be a child, and I think I hope, kind of listening to what everybody's been saying, you're talking about the Glens Men project and men who, and I don't know enough about it to speak, I suppose, but men who maybe didn't feel comfortable or confident, and I'm hoping that we're preparing children so that whenever they're at the age that they're going through the Glens Men kind of project, that they are confident and they're comfortable and they're and that's coming from the teachers. So we're making those connections and reminding the teachers of how to be a child and how to, I suppose, support a child in developing their resilience, getting to that point of the PB where you maybe haven't won and you're having to go, oh, what do I do with this feeling? And just helping them, preparing them. But yeah, it's been a bit of a whirlwind.
I'm intrigued. What did you do what were they playing?
Oh my gosh!
Half a cake.
Oh my goodness! We played loads of games. It was really, really good. We at one stage had them all walking around with lollipop sticks, which sounds absurd. But they were holding on to lollipop sticks, and it was kind of like you had a lollipop to one finger and a lollipop in another person's finger, and you kind of added lollipops in, sticks here and there, and you tried to connect them to other people, and it was all about keeping this going. And even just like song and dance, and it was just really, it was kind of reinforcing the fact that all of the tools that we have to help ourselves live in our body, you know, we talk about movement, you know, like shaking your stuck energy around, shaking those. I know everybody here has probably experienced stress, and sometimes whenever you're experiencing stress, you just want to get up and run or move or growl, and it's just teaching children that you have all of that. Like if you get up and shake yourself around, that's moving that energy, that's getting rid of that adrenaline. And we had relaxation, we had meditation and everything for the teachers. I think they were just absolutely buzzed to get out and get a bit of space and a breath of air. But and even just reminding them to remind the children that we don't need to have loads happening. We don't need to have great things happening. We can just be grateful for, you know, what we've got going on that day.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. There's been a really good exposure locally on Facebook from all the schools. Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Lovely
good.
photos.
Yeah, funny. I had caught one of them later last week of, I think one of the schools had really taken everybody out into the courtyard or the playground and really embraced it, which is amazing.
I think we've got a bit to do yet before we can get Kerry down to work with the kids. I'm not sure what they would do.
In her
Lollipops.
previous life, did come along to the community listeners, one of our community listeners evenings, in Cushendall.
That's right. That was great fun. I had the best crack with everyone.
It was a really lovely evening. The community listeners, I should say, is it's a different sell to the community. It involves all the people that are, it's the same sort of people, you know the faces whenever you go to community listeners, that they've quite often been involved in PB or and the Glens men as well. But they're people that would be maybe not necessarily leaders within their local community, but certainly people that connect the groups, or there may be like a secretary of a group or chairperson or treasurer or something. They usually have some sort of an interest, but it's to try and get them to think of themselves and to be aware of their own mental health and well-being whilst they're helping others. And I think just coming out of COVID, a lot of the listeners felt, they were being lent on. You know, people would have told them things, and maybe like one of the listeners we have is involved in a group, and he said all over COVID he was getting loads of calls, and they'd be on the phone for like an hour and a half just chatting. A lot of widowers and individuals who maybe didn't have family members were maybe shielding, not going out very much. So this gentleman, as a community listener, was having to listen to a lot of different stories from people and experiences, and listen to how they were feeling and how low they were feeling at particular times. So the community listeners programme is how we equip the listeners and help them to upskill, to signpost on to qualified people who can deal with different disclosures like that. And that was my phone. And also, though, to be aware of their own mental health and well-being, because it can wear you down if you're constantly, you know, being not bombarded, but if you're constantly hearing other people's stories and experiences, and then you have to carry that around. So it's how they set boundaries for themselves to know how much to take on, when it's time to step back. But also, a lot of the listeners didn't know what services were in their local area, or what services had outreach into our local area, because the Glens Healthy Places is fairly rural, and a lot of, for example, the MDT, the multidisciplinary teams in Causeway, they don't come into the Glens here. We don't have MDT here. So even the first night, just to mention the services that were available. A lot of people had no idea. A lot of people didn't know that you could go to the local library, call in there, the different groups, the reading group, the knit and natter group, that you can call in and use the computers anytime. So wee things like that were totally enlightening. And it's just building on that. But I wouldn't say that they certainly don't have the same camaraderie as the Glens men would have. But I think they now see how their role within the community is important, and that they actually have a role. They definitely wouldn't call themselves leaders or ambassadors or connectors or anything like that, and they certainly didn't want to be sent up as a port of call for somebody who maybe was concerned about their mental health. But they just feel stronger now that they have the knowledge and they know who to signpost on to. But unfortunately, at this stage now, with the programme, individuals are being referred on, but the services are just absolutely, the waiting list is crazy. So it's sort of like you're opening up a can of worms, and this is what we can do, but we can't do it until, for another 6 months, or you can't avail of that service for another 6 months. So it's a tricky one just at the point we're at the minute. But I think even the fact that they're more aware, they've gone through a bit of training. Kerry had come down, we did a wee session with Aware, and that's what I started off to say in a roundabout way, was that night it was all about self-care and mental health, and we thought this is going to be quite heavy, It was a really fun evening, was the surprising thing about it. They were so interested in it. They got into all the group work. The feedback was really good. There were a couple of individuals came along, but most of them were from groups. But how did you think that went that evening?
I loved it. I think I know this is sort of separate to what I am here for, but that was my first face-to-face one after COVID. I'd been doing everything online, and I think everybody was just happy to be out.
Yeah.
But no, I thought it was fantastic, and just you kind of reflecting back on the personalities, and you can see how those people would draw other individuals to them. Everybody who was there on that evening was so warm and so open, and you can, if I was somebody who was struggling, I could see why people would go to them as a listening ear for support. And they totally embodied, looking after themselves. You're just being able and open to having the crack for an evening, So I thought it was brilliant, yeah.
See, that's the other thing as well, though, that I think we're, as a network, that we are, because we're involved in the community sector, I think we're best placed. You get to know your groups, and you get to know the individuals. And we all know that every community group is different, completely different, in the dynamics within a group. But when you know your groups, you know who to target for our listener.
I was just thinking something you said, Claire, and this blue sky thinking. Okay, this is dream world, but just again the connection between PB and the community listeners, because the dream of PB is not just settling for small pots of money on the table. That's just to start the journey. The big dream is that communities start to shape public budgets and budget set. And I'm just thinking there's something really interesting you just said around the community listeners now starting to be aware of the services and starting to signpost, but the services are just beyond capacity. And if we started to map that or track that, could we imagine starting to look at, is there kind of a statutory agency, the trust, or a bit of the trust, or the PH, I don't know, but actually you would start to shape the budget based on what the needs are in a local area. I mean, that's where we need to get to, that a local community is starting to shape the health budget that's allocated for the area. So it's just something you said, I just thought it'd be really, really interesting to see. I mean, it is blue sky. We're not there.
It is blue sky.
That's where PB needs to get to. Now, interestingly, the NDT team are starting to look for next financial year. What we need to look for is existing budgets on the table. We're not talking about 100% of public budgets. It's like a little sliver of a public sector budget that someone is willing to PB. And you start to mainstream what participatory budgeting is, based on what the community listeners are starting to explore about our health and well-being priorities, so all of us. I mean, this is kind of where we need, in some ways, to get to. What are the health and well-being priorities of communities, and how do they have the power to start shaping the expenditure budgets based on that?
Well, I would just say, yes, that is certainly blue sky thinking. That was one of the very, very first things that came out of it, was that the communities felt not forgotten about, that's not the right word, but certainly they were not top priority, and they were not in any of the areas that were going to get the services. And we had to be very clear at the start that we were not there to shape services that were coming into the area, because that was just it wasn't part of the remit, really. That would be one I would say, be careful what you wish for, because that to me is just enormous.
It is. It's down the line, but in a way, that's the big picture of where PB needs to be sitting, because we could all get used to £6,000 on the table and people starting to come up with ideas, and that's an important bit. But ultimately, it's citizens shaping how budgets are spent.
There's quite a lot going on in my head now. With what you're saying, because like the whole thing about people self-advocating their own health is huge. If only they realised, you know, you get to a place in your own life and you start to self-advocate. Gone are the days where the GP is going to go, yeah, I rang up looking for an appointment. Oh, well, we'll get you a telephone appointment. Ring next week. And I'm going, whoa, hang on a minute. I need to see somebody, you know, whatever. But that's not just me. There's loads of people out there, because the dependency, what we've always been used to, was ring the GP and go there. But having said that, I think people need to learn something you said, Kerry. People need to learn about how that they can actually heal themselves in many ways, not of all ills, but understanding that they have the tools, and maybe there's more work there, you know, understanding that there's a certain amount you can do for yourself without all that dependency. That's maybe blue sky thinking too, I don't know, but that's what I would like to see happening, because you learn a lot on the way whenever you can't access the services you need to access. And I
suppose we're coming from very rural communities, where access to services is low. And you know, the idea of actually having services within your village or within your town is nowhere near the plan at the minute. But I suppose what these small PB projects can offer, and leading to those blue sky thinking, or the ideal, is that the community on the ground, the Joe blogs on the ground, understand and know the processes of PB and the importance of that their community voice, and just being able, you know, so if it was to grow up the way, or you know, from a more statutory level down, the people, especially within the Glens area, they have a full understanding of the importance of PB and the democratic process that they can provide for the community, and given the chance of having some statutory fund, you know, some statutory budget or some statutory fund, to be able to have a voice and a say on how that there should be spent, would be amazing, and they would be able to buy straight into it. Because
they could start bringing their own services.
And practice decision making, because none of us are used to democratic decision making practice.
So actually led by the nose.
Practicing wise decision making in a community about the spend of a budget are skills that would be, and then so if a statutory agency is saying, I do have a budget, we can place and say, well, we actually, here's what we have learned, here's our capacity, our skills, our wisdom, around decision making as a community. So it is a whole skill sets to lay the ground, hopefully for the bigger picture.
I think is that it's beginning to advocate for yourself and advocate for your community.
Yeah.
And learning that skill, because that's something
understanding that they can.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realise that they actually can, because we've been used to being led by the nose, or going, you know, COVID certainly taught us how to be locked up. and completely isolated, and you were out of control. So, there's about that, about getting back into going, hang on a minute here, I'm back in control again. I can plan what's going to happen, and we can all lead together. That there is hope now that we're coming out of COVID. I know we're not finished with it yet, but I'm dreaming. But at least now we're more empowered, and you can see the difference in people. They're starting to come out more.
Yeah, I also think that coming out of COVID, that shows that there is a more importance in the need of these community listeners.
Absolutely.
And the mental health and resilience within kids in school. And I don't think we've actually seen the full effect of what lockdown has done to people.
No.
And I think there will be much needed focus.
For years to come, there's going to be a lot of, especially mental health aspect.
So like the fantastic tools that you're being able to offer with the community listeners and like, equipping kids to help deal with their own resilience will be key.
And I think just kind of picking up there, you've got the parents as well of the children who manage lockdown. And part of what we are doing is involving the parents in that Amber approach and giving them the tools and getting them involved in what's your child learning, So it's I think that's a really lovely part of it as well.
In terms of PB, we're still in the throes of PB. We're on to the next phase with the next few villages. So and PB's new to those villages. So we're like sort of going back to step one again, equipping those villages with the knowledge and information of what PB is and how it can benefit your community, and then supporting those communities through those processes and projects. And I suppose the beauty of it being a 2-year project, it does give us the time then to keep continually reflecting on that first phase with the likes of those case studies. And Claire, whenever you mentioned about the young people getting involved with Cushendun Forum, you have the time to actually see how things develop with those projects from that first phase. And that'll be continued to be, it'll be interesting to see how those actually do develop and still evaluate on those first phases. So as much as the PB project has finished, if you like, in those villages, there's still a continuous ripple happening there, and it'd be nice to actually keep an eye on that.
There's one thing for sure, the Glensmen are very proud with that identity and that name. I was pleasantly surprised about how connections developed so quickly at the start of the Glensmen project, but then when we looked at it, it was because of the sense of place and where the people lived, whether they were from Cushendun, Cushendall, Lochgill, Ballintoy, Ballyvoy, Ballycastle, Armoy or Stranopin. They were all very proud of the place in which they lived, whether they had been there for many years or whether they had just arrived and been there for a few years. But whenever that connection developed, we also had planned a number of visits, and I remember our first visits were to the St Patrick's Centre in Downpatrick and also to Crumlin Road Jail. And very quickly, some of those men, many had never met each other for quite a number of years, identified that there were some men who were less mobile than others. Just naturally, by the caring and sharing approach that quickly adopted through the Glensmen project, they went at the pace and they cared for the people who were less mobile on those visits, even though we weren't walking too much because that's the way it had been planned. For some, it's a little bit of a struggle, and that struggle was dissipated by the very fact that other men from that particular area just helped them along and encouraged them and made sure that they were listening and heard from the people who were showing us around those particular locations. So that's just one of many things in the Glensmen project that encourages us as leaders who are involved in it, as community leaders who made the initial connections, and as Glensmen who participate as well. But together we are developing a richness that money can't buy.
So just to follow up on what Sandy was saying about the Glensmen, we're building upon the skills and all their empowerment. We are planning a couple of events to take us into the new year. So we have like a health fair, which is coming up. We also have the digital archives coming up. But the one important thing for us as a team, we need to engage with the men again and ask them what do they want in 2023, because we have another year, another couple of years, no, it's another year anyway coming. And we want to ask them and say, okay, let's plan the next year. So we never plan too far ahead, because we've always been working what they wanted. And then we're always reviewing what they've been doing and how's it worked. So it's really important for us that in January, we're going to step back and say to them, okay, guys, what would you like to see happen for 2023?
And then we've got to take 5 into it. So that keeps going. No, I was going to pick up on Sandy's point about the name, and the community listeners are very proud of their name as well. We had thought of community leaders, then we thought about community ambassadors, and that was built into, remember the little ambassadors for the schools and things. And they didn't want to be seen as that. They felt it was too strong a word, and that they were being set up as something that they didn't want to be, do you remember? So they agreed the name community listeners. So we have our signage and our boards and our wee markers now. So the community listeners that are currently up and running, we're regrouping at the minute, and it's now we're into like the self-care and how to practice self-care, set boundaries, and then we're moving into Ballycastle, Carry, Rathlin, so they'll be the community listeners in Moyle, or Moyle community listeners, or whatever they want to call themselves. So that's our next area, and we're hoping to do that this month and maybe get another meeting in before Christmas time.
I love the power of language. Just going back to that book as well there, just listening to how proudly the community has entitled themselves, not titled themselves, if you know what I mean. And we had a conversation with our young people as to what is it you would like to be. Ambassador, at one stage influencer was mentioned, because that seems to be the cool word. But they all loved being champions, so our fresh little minds champions, as we call them. But yeah, what's next for us is next week we have our next training the trainers. So we've got some more teachers coming in for some relaxation and some games, and then it'll be do you want to come? Get your wee mat out for some meditation. And yeah, we'll just really be hoping to get this implemented. I know some of the schools have started already, Claire, you were saying there, but really getting this implemented into our schools and creating those connections both back to ourselves and with each other. So yeah.